Melissa Crawford's job was to keep drugs and danger out of Valdosta State Prison in Georgia. But instead, she became the very threat she was hired to prevent. As a correctional officer, she was supposed to represent order and discipline. In reality, she was helping flood the prison with methamphetamine and contraband, all for quick cash. Crawford had been working in the prison system for years. She knew exactly how things operated, who checked what, which areas had blind spots, and how to move items past inspection. It wasn't long before she saw an opportunity to profit from the inmates she was supposed to control. Her scheme wasn't complex, but it was devastating. She took bribes in exchange for delivering methamphetamine, marijuana, and cell phones directly into the prison. Handoffs made in parking lots or hidden compartments in her uniform. The drugs would be passed to trusted inmates who then sold them to others inside, keeping the underground economy alive and dangerous. In one intercepted exchange, she was caught coordinating with an outside accomplice to pick up a package behind a gas station. The bag contained crystal meth, pot, and 2 untraceable flip phones. The plan: walk straight into the prison like it was just another shift. No one would suspect a longtime officer. But federal investigators were already watching. Over months, they built a case against Crawford using surveillance, wiretaps, and recorded inmate calls. They uncovered a pattern of deliveries and payoffs, revealing how deep her involvement had gone. When she was finally arrested, she tried to downplay her role, claiming she had been manipulated. But the evidence was overwhelming. In 2020, Melissa Crawford pled guilty in federal court to charges of possession with intent to distribute methamphetamine and conspiracy to introduce contraband into a correctional facility. She was sentenced to 46 months in federal prison, followed by 4 years of supervised release. A once trusted prison guard became an inmate herself, locked away in the very kind of system she had betrayed. Her actions didn't just break the law, they shattered the fragile balance inside a prison already under pressure. Inmates with access to meth and phones can orchestrate violence, threaten families outside, or even run criminal operations across state lines. Crawford enabled that, and she did it for a few $1,000s. Her fall was a loud one in Georgia's prison system, and sadly, she wasn't the only one. Because while Crawford was smuggling drugs through guard checkpoints, a female officer at Rikers Island was smuggling cocaine into one of the most dangerous jails in America and cashing in big while doing it. At Rikers Island, one of America's most dangerous jails, corruption doesn't have to sneak in. Sometimes it walks right through the front gate in a uniform. And that's exactly what Ghislaine Barrientos did. She was a corrections officer, trusted to supervise high-risk inmates, keep the peace, and enforce the rules. But instead of doing her job, Barrientos became part of a growing criminal economy inside the jail. She didn't just turn a blind eye. She actively participated. She accepted thousands of dollars in bribes in exchange for smuggling cocaine, synthetic cannabinoids, also known as K2, and other contraband into Rikers. According to prosecutors, Barrientos had a network. Outside drug suppliers paid her directly, sometimes through Cash App, sometimes in person. She would then hide the drugs in her undergarments or personal belongings and pass them through security checkpoints undetected. Once inside, she handed off the narcotics to inmates who distributed them further. The consequences were immediate and dangerous. K2, a synthetic marijuana substitute, is notoriously unstable. It can cause hallucinations, paranoia, and violent behavior. Inmates high on K2 have attacked staff, harmed themselves, and even died from overdoses. And yet, for Barrientos, the profit outweighed the risk. She wasn't doing this under pressure or threat. She was doing it for money. Investigators at Rikers had long suspected something was wrong. Despite increased security and searches, contraband kept showing up. Eventually, internal surveillance flagged her for suspicious behavior, and federal investigators stepped in. It didn't take long to build a case. They traced the cash transfers, recovered incriminating messages from her phone, and even caught her on video making a handoff. In 2025, Barrientos was arrested and pled guilty to bribery and drug distribution charges. In court, the judge made it clear her crime wasn't just about drugs. It was about breaking public trust in a system already on the verge of collapse. For her role, Barrientos was sentenced to 6 months in federal prison, followed by 6 months of home detention. She was also ordered to forfeit over $11,000 in illegal earnings. Critics called the sentence too light. After all, she had helped fuel a violent underground drug market inside one of the most volatile jails in the country. Others pointed out that her case was just the tip of the iceberg, because while Barrientos was slipping K2 and cocaine through the doors of Rikers, another female guard at a federal prison in Michigan was crossing an entirely different line. She didn't just sneak in contraband, she crossed into forbidden territory, sex with an inmate. Kara Wozniak worked at the Federal Correctional Institution in Milan, Michigan, a place where discipline, routine, and control were meant to keep chaos at bay. But behind closed doors, she was breaking every rule in the book. And eventually the prison would uncover something far more scandalous than just contraband. Between April and November 2023, Wozniak, a federal corrections officer, entered into a sexual relationship with an inmate. But it wasn't just inappropriate, it was criminal. She used her position of power to initiate and maintain the relationship, and while doing so, she also smuggled banned items into the prison. Those items included tobacco, a cell phone, and other personal items. To the outside world, they might seem small. But inside prison walls, a single cell phone can be more dangerous than a weapon, allowing inmates to coordinate gang activity, extort families, or plan escapes. And tobacco, while legal on the outside, is a controlled substance in federal facilities, often traded like currency. Wozniak didn't just hand over the goods once. Prosecutors say she provided multiple deliveries using her badge to avoid suspicion. She made arrangements in secluded areas of the facility and used her shifts as cover to meet the inmate privately. It didn't stay secret forever. The relationship was uncovered through an internal investigation triggered by unusual inmate behavior and staff suspicions. Prison officials reviewed surveillance footage, tracked down communication records, and uncovered physical evidence in the inmate's cell. The truth was undeniable. Wozniak was arrested and charged in November 2023 with providing contraband and engaging in sexual acts with a federal inmate. Both federal crimes. If convicted, she faces up to 15 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. In federal court, prosecutors emphasized that this wasn't just about smuggling or sex. It was about power. Wozniak had abused her authority, compromised the safety of the institution, and destroyed the public's trust in a system already facing scrutiny. The inmate involved wasn't named publicly, but reports suggest he used the relationship to gain status and control within the prison. Other inmates watched. Some mimicked. It set off a ripple effect of further misconduct investigations inside the Milan facility. And this isn't the only case of a guard crossing the line with inmates. But Wozniak's case stood out because of her federal status, the nature of the relationship, and the sheer arrogance of thinking she could get away with it. But while Wozniak's story may sound extreme, what's happening in one southern state is on another level entirely. In Georgia, hundreds of prison guards, mostly women, have been arrested in a shocking system-wide smuggling operation that's still unfolding. What happened inside Georgia's prison system wasn't a scandal. It was an epidemic. Over just a few years, more than 360 correctional officers were arrested for smuggling contraband into prisons. And here's the most shocking part. The vast majority of them were women. According to internal audits and Department of Corrections reports, at least 80% of the correctional staff arrested for smuggling since 2018 were female officers, many of them under 30 years old, recently hired and poorly trained. Their crimes weren't subtle. They were caught bringing in methamphetamine, marijuana, burner phones, tobacco, and even weapons. Some of the women were caught red-handed, hiding cell phones in their bras or drug packages taped under their uniforms. Others were part of larger networks, moving items for gangs like the Ghostface Gangsters and Bloods in exchange for cash. In one case, a female officer was found with 13 phones and 7 SIM cards in her bag, all intended for a single inmate with gang connections. In another, a guard confessed she made over $20,000 in 6 months by sneaking in meth and weed, and never got searched once. How could this happen? It turns out many Georgia prisons had deep staffing shortages. Hiring standards were lowered, background checks were rushed, and in some cases, female officers were recruited by inmates themselves. Groomed over time through flirtation, promises of money, or emotional manipulation. One investigator described it like this: they were seduced with compliments, easy money, and power. But once they crossed the line, the inmates owned them. Some female guards even developed romantic relationships with the prisoners they were supposed to monitor. A few became pregnant, others were blackmailed. It was no longer a prison. It was a breeding ground for corruption. The Georgia Department of Corrections launched multiple task forces to address the crisis, but the numbers kept climbing. Journalists uncovered internal memos showing that certain facilities had smuggling arrests almost monthly. One warden reportedly joked, "I don't run a prison anymore, I run a cartel hub." The problem wasn't isolated to one facility. Prisons in Telfair, Dodge, and Ware counties all reported widespread contraband trafficking. Some guards worked alone, others were part of inmate-led supply chains, moving product from outside drop points across prison fences and straight into cells. And while Georgia's DOC made promises about better screening, stricter oversight, and technology upgrades, the damage was already done. The fallout? Dozens of convictions overturned due to tainted inmate communications. Staff turnover soared, and public trust in the corrections system hit an all-time low. But the worst cases weren't just about drugs or phones. Because in Alabama, one prison supervisor used his authority to force women into sex. With threats so cruel, one victim said she thought she'd never see her child again. LaQuentin Brantley wasn't just a guard. He was a prison supervisor at Alabama's infamous Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women, a facility already known for overcrowding, underfunding, and abuse. But Brantley didn't try to fix anything. Instead, he became one of the worst predators behind those walls. According to court documents, Brantley used his authority to sexually coerce female inmates, threatening them with extended isolation, loss of visitation rights, and even false disciplinary write-ups. One woman said he pulled her aside after a routine lineup, cornered her in a staff office, and said, "If you want to see your child again, you'll do exactly what I say." That woman complied. She wasn't the only one. Brantley didn't use force. He used fear. He made it clear that he controlled transfers, lockdowns, and every form of contact the women had with the outside world. For inmates, that kind of power was absolute. One wrong move and your phone calls disappeared, your mail vanished, your parole delayed indefinitely. Over time, Brantley developed a reputation. He would target new inmates, especially those with children, and offer them protection in exchange for sexual favors. He timed his abuse during low traffic hours when other staff were off duty or distracted. And because of the culture inside Tutwiler, the women had no one to turn to. When one victim finally reported him, her claims were ignored. 2 weeks later, she was written up for insubordination, and put in solitary confinement. It wasn't until 2024, when an outside legal aid group took interest in the prison, that the pattern came to light. After interviews with more than a dozen women, multiple affidavits were filed, detailing years of sexual exploitation by Brantley and other male officers. The FBI stepped in. During the investigation, they uncovered disturbing texts, handwritten notes, and camera blind spots Brantley routinely used. When confronted, he denied everything, until investigators presented audio recordings from a wired inmate. His voice was unmistakable. In 2025, Brantley was indicted and ultimately convicted on federal civil rights charges and aggravated sexual abuse. He was sentenced to 27 years in federal prison, a rare outcome in a system where abuse by male guards is often covered up or ignored. But the damage he caused goes far beyond prison walls. Survivors reported long-term trauma, suicide attempts, and broken families. One woman said she no longer trusted any man, guard or otherwise. The case triggered a national outcry and forced Alabama's Department of Corrections to shut down part of Tutwiler for internal restructuring. But for many, the reform came too late. And if you think that's as far as it goes, one man using power to exploit women, wait until you see what happened in Baltimore. There, entire groups of female officers didn't just help prisoners, they worked for them. In Baltimore's jail system, power didn't always belong to the guards. At one point, it belonged to a gang, the Black Guerrilla Family, or BGF. And the people helping them run their empire weren't inmates. They were the female correctional officers. This wasn't one corrupt officer or one bad decision. This was a fully developed criminal organization operating inside the Baltimore City Detention Center, with at least 13 female guards implicated. Some were bribed, others were seduced. But many became willing accomplices in one of the most brazen prison conspiracies in U.S. history. At the center of the operation was Tavon White, a high-ranking BGF member serving time for attempted murder. White used contraband phones to orchestrate drug trafficking, money laundering, and violent gang coordination, all from inside his cell. But he didn't do it alone. He relied on the very people assigned to keep him locked down. Female correctional officers smuggled in drugs, weapons, cell phones, and cash. In return, they received expensive gifts, including cars, designer handbags, and even rent money. Some of the guards developed romantic relationships with BGF members. Two became pregnant with Tavon White's children. And while this sounds like fiction, the facts are well documented. The FBI began investigating the jail in 2012 after a spike in inmate violence and suspicious activity. What they found shocked even veteran agents. Female officers were not only supplying drugs and cell phones, they were helping launder money, conceal gang messages, and protect gang leaders from internal punishment. One guard was caught with stacks of money and hundreds of Suboxone strips and opioid hidden in her locker. Another had Tavon tattooed on her neck. In recorded conversations, Tavon White boasted, "This is my jail. I make every move in here, I run everything." He wasn't exaggerating. Over time, the gang expanded its control to include guard hiring, supply logistics, and intimidation of staff. The entire detention center became a base of operations, and the guards were no longer guards. They were soldiers in his network. When the indictment dropped in 2013, it included 25 defendants, among them 13 female corrections officers. The charges ranged from racketeering to drug distribution to conspiracy to commit money laundering. Federal prosecutors said the women betrayed the public's trust and helped turn the jail into a criminal headquarters. Several officers pled guilty and received sentences between 2 and 10 years in federal prison. The BGF scandal forced the state to close Baltimore's detention center in 2015. A rare and public acknowledgement of complete institutional failure. For years, the jail had been run not by the state, but by the gang inside it. And the worst part, most of the guards weren't forced to do it, they chose to. They wore uniforms, they enforced rules, and then they crossed every line, from smuggling drugs to sleeping with inmates to running entire prisons like cartels. These women didn't just bend the system, they shattered it. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and buried in truth, smash that subscribe button before they try to silence us.